Okay, so we'll be starting with AUDCIS Module 5, which is Application Systems, Risks and Controls. So first, let's look at our learning objectives. First one is to discuss common risks associated with application systems. Next, discuss common risks associated with end user development or end user computing application systems. Three, discuss risks to systems exchange in business information and describe common standards for their audit assessments or EDI. Number four, describe web applications including best secure coding practices and common risks. Number five, explain applications or explain application controls and how they are used to safeguard the input, processing, and output of information. Lastly, number six, discuss the IT auditor's involvement in an examination of application systems. So, application systems have provided automated functions to effectively support the business processes. However, these applications also introduced what we call risks. So these risks come in form of different things such as increased costs, loss of data integrity, weaknesses in confidentiality, lack of availability, and poor performance, among others. And further, once implemented, some applications may need to be periodically modified to either correct errors or just implement upgrades and enhancements, such as maintenance. This maintenance works will need to be consistent with business or IT strategies. Otherwise, it may cause performance issues and inefficient use of resources. So we will be discussing common risks to various types of application systems and provide examples of such potential risks. We will also be touching on relevant application controls that can be implemented by organizations in order to mitigate the risks that we have discussed. And then the last part would be, of course, the focus of what is the involvement of the IT auditor in this scenario. So, one of the main applications usually being focused in businesses is what we call the enterprise resource planning software. These are typically, of course, the bigger software that encompasses different processes within within the business. So ERP systems provide standard business functionality in an IT environment system. It provides procurement, inventory, accounting, and human resources. So this allows multiple functions to access a common database, which will, of course, reduce our storage costs and increasing consistency and availability, including accuracy and timeliness of data from a single point in the organization to other points, branches, and other departments within the organization. So, however, there can be processing errors that can quickly impact multiple functionalities as the information is shared. Of course, what we have garbage in, garbage out. So, if we fail to process information correctly from the start, the output and whatever is processed would also be garbage. So, despite the many advantages of ERP systems, they are not without risks. So, one of the major risks is, of course, it will require extensive modification to new or existing business processes. So, ERP modifications, for example, software releases require considerable programming to retrofit all of organization specific code. For example, in accounting, you would fit your chart of accounts. Of course, your chart of accounts might have, let's say, 8 digits or 5 digits, pero however, your accounting system or ERP, let's say SAP, would require you to have 10 digits. So you'll have to add more numbers or more digits to your accounting code, your chart of accounts. And so changes in business operations may also not fit well with to the organization's culture or and existing processes. So you will have to have either you will retrofit your business process to match the vendor's process according to their ERP, or you will customize the ERP so that it matches your own business process. And of course, since this is a new software, uh, or this is a quite complicated software, your employees needs to be trained so it can be used properly and optimize the benefits. And lastly, there can also be integration issues. For example, you are in a specialized industry, let's say you are an airline company. So usually airline company has a special software for ticket pricing or determining how much your tickets would cost depending on your choice of whether you want to be in a first class or you want to be in the economy. And then when are you flying? What is your destination? What is the date? Is there an ongoing holiday, may promo or wala? The price would be modified or change according to different criteria. So your accounting software, whatever your ERP, should be able to integrate with whatever is existing or being currently used by your company. And if not, then you would have to have additional manual controls or manual processes to augment these software or pay the price of integrating different systems together. So, given these general risks, we discuss more on the many types of common risks associated with not only ERP but application systems as a whole. Number one is weak information security. So, information security will be discussed as part of Module 6, which will refer on how we can protect our information assets so that we can maintain confidentiality, integrity, and availability. This is a problem precisely because some or most of businesses fail to recognize the importance of information security, especially if you have older people in the management. They don't recognize parang the IT systems. They like manual processes. So this is not on the top of their list. However, their businesses is already parang, heavily reliant on information systems, which means that the business should also prioritize the information security. Next, unauthorized access to programs or data. So application systems should have various levels of authorization. Pwedeng the access control is role-based or RBAC, role-based of access controls. So based on your role, you'd have different access to different things within the program or data. So your access will be limited to only on a need to know basis. So this means that information made available to user, whether it is read only or with open access for modification, should be in accordance with the user's jobs, functions, and responsibility. For example, a payroll clerk will need access to the payroll system, pero but this payroll clerk does not need to have access to the billing or sales system. Next, unauthorized remote access. So remote access allows users from within the organization to access its network and computer resources from locations outside the organization's premises. So usually the ERP will be only accessible from within the company. However, as time passes by, or of course, people won't be at the office 24/7 or most days of the week, or sometimes there are uh, emergency purposes that we need to access this ERP, especially another example would be right now that we have been in a pandemic with lockdowns. So the staff or office people would be precluded from going to the office just to access the systems. So remote access to the business facilities is critical for the organization to still function and process transactions. So this is important that only authorized personnel will be given remote access, because if users within or outside the organization's network to gain unauthorized access, sensitive and confidential information may be at risk and negatively impacted. Also, when unscrupulous individuals or bad actors can gain access, computer viruses can be introduced, affecting company files, performance of computers, or just slowing down the network and its resources. So, at a minimum, to combat unauthorized remote access, there should be user IDs and passwords. Also, the use of encrypted networks and what we call the virtual private network or VPN. So it might be popular for you, parang you can access, let's say you want to view something that's only available in Netflix US. So you use a VPN for that. But uh, in a company setting, usually business set up their own VPN so that you can connect securely to the business information, assets, and application systems. Text inaccurate information. So accurate information must be ensured whether the end user is accessing data from application, a database, or information on the cloud. So departmental data repositories such as databases, data clouds, data warehouses may have redundant information within different time frames. So the result is a waste of time in reconciling these repositories to determine which data are accurate. That's why it's also important to have integrated systems so that you have a one source. So you have one source for the truth or one source for your information. This would also lessen the impact that you don't need to compare and check which is the correct information. So next, erroneous or falsified data input. So erroneous data input is when inaccurate data are inputted into the application system unintentionally due to human error. So there can be preventive measures, which will be discussed later, such as check digit and double entry. However, falsified data input, on the other hand, is when inaccurate data are inputted to the application system intentionally with with the intention of defrauding the business or the organization and its stakeholders. In this case, preventive measures may include safeguarding access to programs and data through user authentication and authorization mechanisms. So, incomplete, duplicate, and untimely processing. This is especially prevalent in what we call batch processing. So, usually in batch processing, all information is collected, and at the end of the day, the information is uploaded into the system. The problem is uh, sometimes the system or due to human error or errors in programming with the application, there can be incomplete. So let's say the system can only handle 100 transactions, but we try to input 120 transactions in a batch. So yung 20 may iwan, only 100 is completely processed. Also, there can be a time that uh, the transactions can be processed twice, resulting in duplicates. Or untimely processing is that when you do the batch processing, parang bumagyo, so hindi ka nakapasok, you were not able to do the batch or finish the batch within that day. The information would be untimely because you would be only be proceeding with the batch after having access to the application systems. Next, communication systems failure. So today, application systems within IT environments are responsible for many critical services, including communication services. So especially yung mga local area network na email, which does not use Google or Outlook. And of course, especially now, the internet is a critical resource. So sometimes we don't have access to the internet. So all our business processes are or will be heavily impacted. Next, inaccurate or incomplete output. So output reports will contain errors after processing, compromising the integrity, and also may be distributed improperly. So output control should be in place to verify the data that are accurate and is complete. And lastly, insufficient documentation. So sometimes end users focus on solving a business need and may not recognize the importance of documentation. So they'll do something to solve a current problem or a current need, but that's not documented. So when it happens again, the company has to brainstorm again in order to solve a similar problem. So documentation further ensures maintainability of the system and its components and minimize likelihood of errors. So dapat meron tayong mga flowcharts or mga manuals, especially for ERP systems and other application systems. Any questions so far? Oops. Next, we have end user development application risks. So end user development, also known as end user computing. So this can be interchangeably used. EUD and EUC end user computing generally involves the use of department developed applications, so such as Microsoft Excel, Microsoft Office Access, Microsoft Word, PowerPoint, which are frequently used as tools in performing daily work. So the level of risk and the required controls to be implemented depend on the criticality of the EUD application. So EUD application risks are not easily identified because of the lack of awareness and the absence of adequate resources. So for example, some accountants or yung mga accounting staff or the accounting manager, what they do is they start their work within Excel. Say sa manual gumagawa ng input files before actually inputting them into the system. So the gap between the actual information or source information before it is inputted into the application software or application system of the business is a gap within the end user development risk. So there should also be focus depending on how end user computing is used within the company. So we have several common risks within EUC. So number one is higher organizational costs. So at first, EUD may appear as relatively inexpensive because common tools available to the staff or your officers. However, there are some hidden costs associated with EUD that the organization should consider. So in addition to operational costs, cost may be increased due to lack of training and technical support. So lack of end user training and their experience will result in purchase of inappropriate hardware and implementation of software solutions that are incompatible with organization systems architecture. So end user may also increase organizational costs by creating inefficient or redundant applications. So parang bakit nilalagay pa sa Excel or why they start by doing it in Excel instead of doing it directly within the application system. Next, incompatible systems. So end user designed application systems that are developed in isolation may not be compatible with existing or future organizational IT architectures. So the absence of hardware and software standards can result in the inability to share data with other applications in the organization. Next, redundant systems. In addition to developing incompatible systems, end users may be developing redundant applications or databases because of the lack of communication between departments. Next, ineffective implementation. So end users typically use fourth generation programming languages such as database or internet web development tools to develop applications. So sa Excel, gagamit din sila ng macros, Visual Basic. So in these cases, the end user is usually self-taught. So they lack formal training. So they will lack documentation. Uh, they lack the efficiency in programming, etc. They tend to omit necessary control measures that are required for effective implementation. Additionally, there might be a lack of SOT or segregation of duties because there has been no formal process. No formal process, so walang SDLC, so walang analysis na nangyari, so they just develop what they see fit, what is applicable, and what they need. Next, that's what I said, absence of segregation of duties. So incomplete systems analysis. And of course, since it's just a file, it's made by the end users. There might be unauthorized access to data or programs. So yung payroll, let's say yung payroll sheet, ginawa lang sa Excel or ginawa sa Excel before inputting into the application system instead of doing it directly within the ERP or application system. So that confidential information, when the file gets transferred or the file is put in a central database, other people can see it clearly. Or there is a risk that other persons can see it clearly. Next, also this can result to software piracy. So I think I need this, I think I need that, so they try to install it. So this exposes the company to copyright violation, copyright infringement with regards to software licenses. There's also lack of backup and recovery options since this end user computing or end user development tools applications are not usually part of BCP, business continuity BCP, business continuity protocols. I forgot, sorry. CP, BCP, business continuity planning. So it's not part of the business continuity planning. So when disaster strikes, they may not have access to the same programs or files. And of course, the destruction of information by computer viruses. So this is an opportunity for malware attacks and ransomware attacks, just like what happened to one of the companies in the US, or what you call that? I think NHS in the UK, which is National Hospital System, I think, which is a network of hospitals within UK. They were attacked by a malware or a ransomware, so they didn't have access to data unless they paid with Bitcoin. So viruses can spread among computers connected within the network. So infected files and programs downloaded from a public computer through attachment to emails, hidden codes with hyperlinks, and so on. So it can destroy or alter data, destroy hardware, display unwanted messages, cause keyboards to lock and become inactive, slow down a network by performing many tasks that are really just a continuous loop with no end or resolution, can also be a denial of service attack, produce spam, or launching denial of service attacks. So sometimes when your PC has a malware, it becomes part of what we call a botnet. It's being used in order to launch denial of service attacks. And more recently, your PC can be used for what we call mining bitcoins. So ginagamit yung computer power mo in order to mine bitcoins. I think that's all for end user development application common risks. I think these risks are not really new and really very self-explanatory, especially being uh, familiar with how computers work, how the internet works. So it's not only businesses which needs to protect within the risks, but you as an individual, you have to protect your mobile device, your laptop, your tablet, your personal computer, also from these risks. So this view is just expanding that view from a personal point of view. You take a look at the business as a whole. Instead of just you, you're also thinking about your whole family or whole community or neighborhood. So next is EDI. What's happening? Electronic Data Interchange or EDI. So EDI is a form of exchange or electronic or a standardized format which allows for the electronic exchange of business documents between business or trading, not actually business documents, more of business messages between business or trading partners. So EDI allows organizations to electronically send information in a standard format so that computers are able to read and understand the documents being interchanged. So for example, so instead of a company having a purchase order and then sending it to another company, so you have your PO sending it to a, say your company A, so company B. So instead of you sending a PO and then company B sending a code or a sales order, that manual process is omitted and just replaced with the computers uh, communicating. So yung EDI, ipasok lang sa application system ni company A within their software, which is connected to the software of company B. So when it receives the PO, it will automatically create a sales order within the system, and then the other associated parts will continue. So this removes the manual component or the manual processes within EDI. So let's first discuss EDI or the risks within EDI or Systems Exchange Electronic Business Information. It's basically very similar in very similar in nature. All the risks which focuses on business continuity as interdependence. So business continuity are going concern. So if inadvertent or deliberate corruption of EDI related applications could affect every EDA transaction, so umasa ka that there is inventory or raw materials that will be coming next week. Pero the EDI transaction did not push through pala. So you are left with your production floor with zero materials. Tapos lahat ng workers mo nandun. So they will do nothing. So parang you have a big order that will disrupt your business continuity. Next, interdependence. So you are only dependent with your business partners to whom you have your EDI connections. Next, loss of confidentiality of sensitive information. And this confidential or sensitive information will lead you to an exposure of fraud or manipulation of payment. Since you are connected directly via this electronic interchanges, you are subjecting yourself to more risks of your business partner being able to access or have direct access to your network. So also have a loss of transactions due to errors in communications and communication systems, and which also leads to some loss in audit trail and some application failure. And then you have a concentration of control. So there is increased reliance on computer controls when where they replace manual controls. The use of EDI with its greater reliance on computer systems concentrates control within the hands of a fewer staff, increasing reliance on key people and increases risk. So nawawala yung what we call segregation of duties due to more uh, just because of the volume of staff or people. And of course, due to fraud, some fraud, manipulation of payment, etc., you also have potential legal liability. You can be overcharged by third-party service provider, manipulation of organization, parang pwede kang, you can be blackmailed into providing higher prices, etc. Just because you are the sole business partner within the EDI support. And of course, you might not achieve anticipated cost savings. Within this risk, there can be potential loss of transaction audit trail, thereby making it difficult or impossible to reconcile, reconstruct, and review records. This could possibly be a breach of legislation and result in prosecution and fine. So this also increased exposure to ransom, blackmail, or fraud, potential disruption of services, or increased opportunities to alter computer records in an organization and its trading partners' information systems. It can also disrupt cash flows when payment transactions are generated in error or diverted or manipulated. Can have loss of profitability occurring through increased interest charges or orders going to competitor due to lack of receipt of EDI messages. So dahil hindi dumating yung order, you are left with nothing. So your competitor would be going to your supplier, your customer would go to your competitor, which can provide better business. And such that there would be damage to reputation through loss of major customers, especially if EDI problems are widely criticized. Just to expand on this discussion, hindi na masyadong uso yung ETI within the systems or within businesses. What's much more common right now is application programming interfaces or API. So ETI usually involves lots of customization between two business partners. So mas madalas nilang makikita yung EDI or common occurrence EDI within sister organization or sister businesses, which usually reduces these risks kasi group of companies. So they usually don't have this all these risks and implications. So okay na sa kanila. Then sometimes they just have a single ERP within the group. So there's really no need for EDI interfaces. So companies right now utilize what we call application programming interfaces. So this is just connected to the internet. Yung standard siya, mas madali yung integration within it. For example, let's say uh, I'm not sure, but let's just use it as an example. LBC has API support with Lazada. So you don't have to go to Lazada, punuin mo ng items yung cart mo, and then go to the website of LBC and tell tell na, hey, I need this delivered to my house. You can do all transactions within Lazada, and then the API would communicate the orders with LBC, something like that. Additionally, parang uh, the payments to be processed, they have an API with, let's say, Visa, MasterCard, or what we call a payment processor. So, hindi ka na manggagaling punta sa Lazada and then punta ka sa other bank mo just to process the transaction. You can process it all within the single application. Lang. EDI works the same way as API. Yung nga lang, the API is much more better in integration rather than EDI, which has to be customized. And it allows more information to be transferred. The API, it only transfers specific information depending on the transactions. Okay? Any questions so far? None? Okay. I just discussed the API as an additional information, pero it won't appear in your exams. So next, what are web application risks? So web application is an application in which all or some parts of the software are downloaded from the web each time it is run. So this is what we call a client server architecture. Uso siya ngayon because you won't have to install anything in your PC. You just open your Internet Explorer, your Chrome, your Edge, your Firefox, Safari, whatnot. You don't need to install any application. You just open and then access within the browser. So for example, Canvas is a web application. Yung mga banking software, web application na rin siya. Facebook, Instagram, etc. is a web application. And then you have your Lazada, Shopee, web app na rin siya. So this web apps, you just need to go to the website and do not need to install anything else. So uses a web browser in the client side that is usually platform independent and requires less computing power. So with this, you have reduced time to market, increased user satisfaction, and reduced expenses related to maintenance and support. With this kasi, what you only maintain is your server. So based on Open Web Application Security Project or OSP, the following or these following principles apply to controls to the risks within web applications. So input validation, output encoding, authentication and password management, session management. So input validation, there are will be discussed later. Nakako yung sarili ko. Output encoding, only outputs are shown to you, only important outputs, not those, not everything is shown to you. Authentication and password management to make sure that only your account information or information your own is what you get. You don't have access to others within the shared application. Session management, like you can see all your logins, you can log out all other sessions, access control, cryptographic practices, error handling and logging, data protection, communication security, system configuration, database security, file management, and memory management, and general coding practices. So there are several top security risks within web applications. So injection, similar to cross-site scripting and cross forgery. Okay, so usually injection, so XSS cross-site scripting and cross-site cross surgery SSRF usually happens when a user log in. So usually what happens kasi diba, when you log in, your username and password is verified through injection or XSS or XSRF. Uh, minsan only your username is verified, and then they will put an injection or using XSS instead of verifying your password and checking the database. They'll program it or inject it with a code so that they will accept whatever the password that is inputted, giving them access to your account. Or it can also give access to the administrator to the web application. Next, broken authentication and session management. Same. Access control, security misconfiguration, sensitive data exposure, insufficient attack protection, and using components with known vulnerabilities. In underprotected application program interfaces. So yun, sometimes there because of the broken authentication, injection, and XSS and XSRF can happen. And because of this, there must be parang session management. Let's say, to further explain in session management, let's say you are online in PC1. When you try to go online PC2, your PC1 access would be expired or logged out. So only one active application access at a time. Because if it allows for several or multiple logins at a time, there is a higher risk that um, from the broken authentication, now two people have access. Say you are accessing your account and another a hacker also has access to your account. That's why it's very important that sensitive data is protected and there is sufficient attack protection mechanisms and protected APIs, and make sure that the application is always updated or patched. Any questions so far? So after discussing on the risks, we move on to application controls. So of course, controls fall within either general computer controls, which includes IDGCs, examining policies and procedures to relate to many applications and supports effective functioning of the application control. Now, inside your general computer controls is your application controls, which examine procedure specific and unique to the application. This can also be referred to as automated controls. They are concerned with accuracy, completeness, validity, and authorization of data captured, entered, processed, stored, transmitted, and reported. So examples of application controls includes validating data input, checking mathematical accuracy of records, numerical sequence check, etc. So we separate this application controls into three. So input controls, processing controls, and output controls. First, so input controls. Input controls focus on authenticity of transaction. So it's the property of being genuine and being able to be verified and trusted. So authenticity ensures that only authorized users have access to entering transactions. So generic accounts should not be used. Dapat always there should be an assigned user ID. Next, accuracy. So accuracy is ensures that the information entered into an application is consistent and complies with policies and procedures. So there are several examples for edit and validation controls. For example, number one, field check. So this confirms that the characters in the field are of a proper type. So it can be, let's say, numeric, alphanumeric, yun lang yung accepted for the field check. Next, sign check validates that the data in the field has an appropriate positive or negative sign. So for example, if the field is height, of course, pag negative, bawal. It's gonna be checked with the sign check. Next, limit or range check. So, for example, you are mm, you only or you have limited stocks. You only allow 1 to 5 orders. So, people should only be able to order from your shop either 0 or 5 pieces. So they cannot also input, let's say, 6. Pag 6 pag error, that is a range check. Next, size check. Check that the size of the data enter fits into the specific field. So let's say your last name, 20 characters lang. Dapat. Completeness check corroborates that all required and necessary data is entered. Next, validity check compares data from transaction file to that of the master file to verify for existence. Let's say account number. So it will be checked against the bank's database if it exists. So if it's invalid, it will show a message that it is invalid. Next, reasonableness check. Check for correctness of logical relationship between two data items. And lastly, check digit verification. So usually this is applicable to account numbers. So let's say your account number is 183-541. They will add another digit which is mathematically computed as your check digit. So this is usually computed na parang i-add nila to, add nila to, add nila to. Then add nila results to arrive at your check digit. Dun siya nakukuha. So if when you input your account number, the application would check the first 6 numbers against the check digit that you have entered. So kung 183-541 and then your check digit is let's say 9, tapos ang in-input mo 103-519, this would be not allowed by the check digit verification because one of the digit is wrong and will not match your check digit. Okay? And lastly, completeness. So similar to completeness check. The input is completed. All the fields or required fields are filled out properly. Next, processing controls the accuracy and completeness. So the following should be required. So the error activity is logged. Error correction and their submissions are approved, especially for example sa credit checks. So define responsibility for suspense files, reports of unresolved errors, and aging and prioritization of unresolved errors. So there are several control points, which are example of major job processing points as an application control. So programs that accept transactions from input processing, examples are user interfaces. Next, major processing modules. These are programs that modify the data, which they perform calculations, etc. Next, branching points. Programs that split or merge the data. Programs merging data from two or more different input sources to one file. Then files then used as the data feed for the financial reporting system, etc. And lastly, output points, result of the data processing, financial operational reports, printed checks, output data file, etc. So designed properly, balancing totals for transaction count and amount can detect missing or duplicate transactions. So part A, so makita natin balancing totals, yung count niya 10, count niya dito 10, from the billing system to the receivable system, 1,250 in total niya invoice out, yung invoice in sa receivable system, 1 to 50. So this is correct. So in part B, this is what we call yung three-way matching. So record count 10 from the billing system, record count from the payment 7. So total records within the accounts receivable reconciliation 10 plus 7, 17 records siya. 10 records showing accounts receivable invoices in, and then payment of accounts receivable 7 records, so total 17 records. And then of course yung record the billing system 1,250 minus 850 payments, you have a record sum of 400. So hindi lang yung totals yung kinukuha natin, which is what we call balance totals. We also check sometimes the total of quantity totals for the quantity. Sometimes we can also total say itong unit price or part numbers, which is what we call a hash total. This is an additional control. Just so we can see that the input or whatever is input, when it's processed out, that everything has been processed. Walang nasingit, walang naialis from our data. So other controls include data matching. So there are two or more items before executing a particular command or action. So matching invoices to purchase order or receiving report before making a payment, etc. So parang before making a payment, may nakaset up ba ang payable, na-receive na ba yung products indicated in the invoice, etc. File labels ensure that the correct and most updated file is being used. Cross-footing compares to alternative ways of calculating the same total in order to verify for accuracy. For example, adding rows and by columns in a spreadsheet, etc. Zero balance tests checks that a particular account, for example, payroll clearing account, dapat zero, maintains a balance of zero. This test assists organization eliminating excess balance in separate accounts and maintaining greater control over disbursements. Right protection mechanism safeguard against overwriting or erasing data. That's why usually this is important in accounting, di ba? So instead of erasing or deleting, we usually have adjusting entries. So ina-add lang, hindi mo dinidelete yung whatever yung mali. Lastly, concurrent update control, so it prevents errors of two or more users updating the same record at the same time. Lastly, output controls. There are only two. that the output is accurate and complete. And then proper output is distributed only to those who require it or need it. So limited tayo sa role-based access control. And then the output is retained. For example, accounting records or reports has to be maintained for 10 years. Transactions has to be maintained for 5 years, etc. Any questions so far? Wala po. Next tayo. Lastly, IT auditors involvement. So IT auditors can assist organizations by reviewing their application systems to ensure they comply with organization strategy and standards, as well as provide automated functions to effectively support the business processes. Can do this assessment and do as part of the audit plan and communicate scope of involvement, management expectations, the role of IT, etc. That ends module 4. Do you have any questions? We have none, so we conclude chapter 4. So applications are critical, very critical for organizations in conducting their business. So sometimes this represents a significant investment for many organizations to provide automated functions for the business. So with the identification of, let's qualify, significant risks should be addressed with controls. So if not directly, dapat may compensating control. And sometimes, we must always recognize the fact that one of the biggest risks is not within the computer, but within the users. So we must not only look at or look within the computer and the application only, but assess the impact of users, especially their knowledge and whether they have adequate training. Hindi syunga-syunga tawag natin siya. So IT auditors can assist organizations by reviewing their application systems to ensure that they comply with organization strategy and standards. As well as provide automated functions to effectively support the business process. Yun lang. If you see it's a bit simpler in terms of control, especially since computers usually follow a logical line. So mas important or emphasis, may emphasis ang controls within your inputs. Yung processing and output, usually it's just later on. What important is yung inputs. So how the raw information is inputted within the system so that it gets processed. And of course, safeguard your input processes, so user ID, passwords, encryption, remote access, etc. Then ITGCs against Trojan horses, time bombs, etc. Yun lang. Dahil na questions. That ends for module 4.